On This Week in Enterprise Tech, we talk about a country fearing the Apple Watch, the Backpage CEO is in trouble, and we also have a great guest, Vitali Kremez from Flashpoint, who talks to us about EMV chip and pin technology. Twyat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twyat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 211, recorded October 14th, 2016. Chip and pin.
This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by LinkedIn Learning. Develop talent and keep skills current with expert-led on-demand e-learning. To request a demo for your organization and get a free individual trial, visit learning.linkedin.com/twit. And by Jira Service Desk from Atlassian. Jira Service Desk delivers everything your IT team needs out of the box at a cost-effective price. For a free trial of Jira Service Desk, visit atlassian.com/twit. And by ZipRecruiter. Are you hiring? With ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100-plus job sites, including social networks, all with a single click. Screen, rate, and hire the right candidates fast. Try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/twit.
Welcome to Twyat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that is dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host for today, Louis Maresca, your tour guide through the world of enterprise. I'm definitely not going to take you on this tour alone. Today, I'm joined by expert co-hosts and enterprise tech professionals, my friends and colleagues, starting with the Director of Advanced Network Computing Laboratory, Mr. Brian Chee. Brian, are you getting the same nasty weather that we are down there in the tropical state of Hawaii?
No, we've had that already. The Pineapple Express is heading over to the Pacific Northwest. You're welcome.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Also, my co-host in crime could not be complete without Mr. Curtis Franklin from Information Week Radio. Curtis, how's the weather down there in the swamp?
This week it is superb. We had our brush with hurricanes a week ago. They're gone, and blue skies here in the swamp.
Fantastic. Well, we need a little bit of that coming up here, too, as well, the Seattle area. Well, folks, we have quite a show today. Not only are we going to talk about a country actually fearing the Apple Watch and Backpage CEO Carl Farah being in trouble, but we also have a great guest who's going to take us into the world of cybersecurity, how it affects consumers, enterprises alike. But before we do that, let's go ahead and jump into the blips. A new study is published in the Nature Journal proposes that terahertz radiation, which is emitted from terahertz waves, or T-waves, could be used in place of magnetic fields to perform cell resets in computer memory. By doing this, it's reported that this could increase the speed of memory access by almost 1,000 times. T-rays are almost commonly used in airport body scanners. The speed increase comes from the ability of the waves to switch memory cells in a trillionth of a second. The speed at which cells can be flipped currently limits the operation rate of computer memory because of the switching is done by an external magnetic field. Although the technology is not ready for mainstream, the future of AI might bank on it.
Big corporations are teaming up to make data flow faster. Data is getting bigger and more critical, and that worries many of the companies that build hardware and software for the enterprise. A bunch of those companies are getting together in two consortia to take away some of the speed bumps in the very large data infrastructure. The first of these is OpenCAPI. OpenCAPI, announced Friday, will link storage, memory, GPUs, and CPUs, much like PCI Express 3.0, but will be 10 times faster with data speeds of 150 gigabytes per second. Servers and supercomputers will be the first to get OpenCAPI slots, though the technology could trickle down to PCs in the coming years. A second consortium called Gen Z boasts big names including Samsung, Dell, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, AMD, ARM, and Micron. The specifications from Gen Z, which is focused heavily on memory and storage, could potentially decouple a server's internal units into separate boxes, establishing a peer-to-peer connection between all of them. Having memory, storage, and processing in discrete boxes would be beneficial for applications like SAP's HANA, which is an in-memory product. OpenCAPI and Gen Z claim their protocols are open for every hardware maker to adopt. However, there will be challenges in pushing these interconnects to servers, not least the fact that, for now, Intel is not a member of either of these consortiums.
Germany wants to ban internal combustion engines by the year 2030. The resolution just passed by the Bundesrat calls on the European Commission to evaluate the recent tax and contribution practices of the member states on their effectiveness in promoting zero-emission mobility, which many are taking to mean an end to the lower tax levels of tax currently levied on diesel fuel across Europe. Since this legislation is currently non-binding, it does signal, however, a strong wish to go to renewable fuels for Europe, and with Germany making very strong moves into the all-electric vehicle fleet.
Evernote recently showed up in the news due to a big software bug that was known to actually cause data loss. In the software industry, most P0 or critical bugs are the ones that actually cause data loss. So this one was really no joke. The bug triggered by a certain sequence of events can cause an image or other attachments to be deleted from notes without warning, but the text was not affected. It was reported that a bug has been disastrous to several users, where one PhD researcher student said that they lost 20,000 notes due to corruption. For users affected, data recovery might not be possible, according to the email sent to the users from Evernote. Evernote is advertising that if users want the ability to go back in time with their notes, they should probably enable the premium feature for note history to recover data. On a lighter note, to bring back the faith in Evernote, they've offered a free year in Evernote Premium, which is their paid tier.
IBM is taking CleverSafe to the cloud. IBM is taking storage to the cloud with its Cloud Object Storage Service, which uses CleverSafe Secure Slice object storage technology. The storage as a service offering became available this week and lets enterprises use both on-premises storage and the IBM Cloud to store unstructured data objects, which can include anything from videos to genomic sequencing data. Cloud Object Storage also carries over support for the Amazon S3 and OpenStack Swift APIs, and allows clients to choose between regional service, which spreads their data across multiple data centers in a given region, and cross-regional service, which spans at least 3 geographically dispersed regions.
I bring you the Requiem for the Apple X server. We may have thought that the Apple X server died a long time ago. The reality is that because of Apple's insistence upon it only being legal to virtualize OS X on Apple hardware, has created a strong used market for the X server running VMware and virtual OS X machines. This market seems centered on heavy Mac shops like design firms, still wanting an easier way to deploy changes to virtual workstations with the ability to run a true lights-out server environment. So even with Apple trying to push their users onto Mac Pros and Minis, the enterprise market is still trading X server parts around in a strong secondary market.
GlobalSign has inadvertently triggered the revocation of its intermediary certificates while updating a special cross certificate. This smashed the chain of trust and ultimately nullified SSL and TLS certificates issued by GlobalSign to its customers. It could take days to fix, leaving folks unable to easily read their favorite web pages. Some of the larger sites that were affected were the Financial Times, Guardian, Wikipedia, LogMeIn, and Dropbox. GlobalSign has since removed the cross certificate from their OSC database and cleared their caches. End users cannot always easily clear their caches because of either lack of knowledge or even permission sometimes. Since most caches response expire in 4 days, users should start being able to see and access sites soon enough. Well, folks, that ends the blips. But next up, we have some bites where Apple Watch is feared and the Backpage CEO is in trouble. But first, we have an amazing supporter of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and Padre wants to tell you about it. Padre?
Thank you, gentlemen. Let's go ahead and take a moment to thank a sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now, did you know that skills, the skills that we develop, that we treasure, that we learn, have about a 5-year shelf life? And that shouldn't be surprising because most of the fastest growing in-demand skills today didn't exist 5 years ago. So the question is, how do you keep yourself current? How do you keep your team current? How do you make sure that you have the skills you need to succeed? Well, folks, if you're watching us, the answer is LinkedIn Learning. LinkedIn Learning is a personalized, expert-led, on-demand e-learning service from LinkedIn. It helps keep your team engaged because LinkedIn Learning is the perfect way to promote professional development. LinkedIn Learning will identify the precise skills that you or your organization needs to achieve set goals, and then it will create personalized recommendations using LinkedIn Network Intelligence. Your team will have access to more than 9,000 courses and more than 25 courses that are added every week. Their library includes courses taught by world-class industry experts and cover topics ranging from leadership skills to design principles and programming. You can learn anytime you want, anywhere with their bite-sized segments that can be viewed on any device, online and off. Now, these bite-sized videos provide you with immediate problem solving and can be downloaded to learn on the go, so you could use it as a reference even when you're not connected. It's the perfect way to help team members close a skill gap without interrupting your latest project. Team solutions are available for as little as $2,000, so really this is a bargain if you're looking to make sure your team stays current in its skills and in its opportunities. We want you to try LinkedIn Learning. Grow your network and career. Visit learning.linkedin.com/twit to request a demo for your organization or get a free individual trial. That's learning.linkedin.com/twit. And we thank LinkedIn Learning for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech.
Thanks, Padre. Well, let's go ahead and jump into the bites. This first story brings up several interesting topics around BYOD and whether security will only be possible by the absence of technology. Previously, ministers in the UK were banned from bringing smartphones and tablets to cabinet meetings in fear of hacked devices. Ministers have reportedly been told now they can't even wear smartwatches in cabinet meetings after concerns that they could be hacked by Russian spies and used as listening devices. This is part of the rising trend on the fear from Russian hacking groups. This includes recent hacks of the DNC emails during the U.S. election. Now, the UK ban might not be unwarranted here. There have been reports of the ability to remote hack the audio of the Apple Watch. Apple has stated this has been corrected through improved memory handling. There also has been a report that after the release of iOS 10, an algorithm makes it 2,500 times easier for hackers to access passwords and sensitive information when the iPhone and iPad backups take place through iTunes. So without going down the rabbit hole of focusing on Apple security here, Curtis, is this the beginning of the end? Is it time that companies just say, move over devices, no more devices for security purposes?
I think that particular horse is well and truly out of the barn, across the pasture, and down the road. 10 years ago, that's something that a company might have been able to do. But now I think it would be very difficult for companies to say no devices on any kind of widespread version, not least because so many enterprise applications depend upon those devices. And the dependence on devices is getting stronger. When you go to a conference from a company like SAP, which is sort of the epitome of the enterprise application provider, they're all about beautiful applications on and across devices. So I think the days of telling everyone that they need to go to the storeroom, check out a bundle of quill pens and a roll of foolscap, that day is past. It's just going to be up to IT professionals, and especially the security teams, to figure out ways to make sure on a consistent and constant basis that those devices have not been compromised by anyone from outside.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of the world's manufacturers today, they're still not making really good choices when it comes to default values with items like Bluetooth, and there's still quite a bit of vulnerabilities out there. Brian, do you know of some of these vulnerabilities and how companies are handling it?
Yeah, I actually wrote a risk assessment paper for the folks at the Bureau quite a while ago, and I basically propose, hey, there is a Bluetooth virus out in the wild that took advantage of manufacturers basically having some very poor choices on allowing Bluetooth file transfers as a default rather than an opt-in. And I had recently written some software where basically on a phone we could actually have a JavaScript that would sit in the background, actually a Java program sitting in the background, that would periodically take pictures with the phone and then upload them actually securely to another server. And I just proposed in the paper that combining those two pieces together is not a far-fetched situation. And the problem is a lot of the phone holsters that everybody seems to love have the cameras facing outwards. Oops.
I think one of the things that's interesting here is we've seen many different vulnerabilities. I mean, we've seen vulnerabilities where people, leave their computers open and then somebody might stick a USB stick in there. We've seen USB stick malware out there in the wild, and sometimes it's undetectable. And a lot of the ministers are actually worried about these because there was a lot of them were distributed at the G20 summit in St. Petersburg. But is this a viable thing? I mean, should they not be bringing their own devices to these types of meetings, especially to how important they are? What do you think, Kurt? Is this something they just need to crack down on, and they should be less worried about it?
I don't think that they should be less worried about it. On the other hand, especially at the level of minister, I don't think that it's going to work really well to tell them that they just can't use certain technology. I mean, we've seen in the corporate world how well it works when you try to tell a CEO that they can't use a particular device. I mean, that is frankly how the iPad became the default tablet device for the enterprise. They came in from the top, not the bottom. I think, as Brian pointed out, the real issue isn't so much the capabilities of the device, but the default behavior of the devices. So what we really need to see are many more people paying close attention to what's available through MDM, or mobile device management systems, where you can specify that those devices have to be configured in particular ways, have to have certain defensive hardware and software enabled before they're allowed to attach to the organization's network. Making sure that the devices aren't in the most vulnerable default states will go a long way toward making sure that they are secure when they're used inside the organization. Will there always be specific meetings where you want to take the devices off because the most sensitive information is being discussed? Sure. But as a default position, I think that saying, let's just get rid of all the smartphones, smartwatches, tablets, and everything else is going farther than most organizations are going to be willing to go.
Absolutely. What I'm seeing, too, is an interesting trend. You talk about MDM and bringing kind of that into the workplace and kind of forcing policies onto the phones, on the devices. Another thing that we're seeing a lot, especially in the IT and admin side of things, is these GAP PCs, these types of PCs, or maybe in these other types of PCs where they're restricted down to the point where you can't even plug a USB drive into them. And, the more secure type thing, locked down to the point where, you have to log into a special VM and it's more of JIT admin access to things going forward. So you're not really accessible to some of the hardware that's on a device. Brian, is this a better way to potentially secure things than even MDM in this case?
I hate it. I love being able to install my own software. I love being able to do a lot of different things. But when it comes to the world of national security, I have to change my hats. And the reality is there is a very long process on certifying a piece of computing equipment for use in a classified environment. And that's definitely what these ministers are dealing with. So the reality is you even with a very well locked down machine, you can still run PowerPoint. You can still run web browsers. You can still run a lot of different things. It's just a matter of the world needs to change. And I'm afraid these ministers are going to have to change. When I walk into when I used to walk into a high security environment, we used to have little cubby holes where we put things like electronic watches. We did that 20 years ago. Any kind of phone, any kind of pager, anything that had two-way communications. And we dropped those off. Heck, we weren't even allowed to take in floppies or USB sticks. Any kind of media had to be sanitized by the facility security officer. This is something that's been in place and is something done for a long, long, long time. And JJ, I'm sorry, even Chrome OS has to go under the same kind of scrutiny because it has storage. anything that has storage is not supposed to be in a high security environment, and anything that is storage must be scanned and must be sanitized by the facility security before it is allowed into a secured space. This is not rocket science, and I think there's a compromise there. I'm just not sure how well it's going to work with some of the real serious talent coming out with these hacking groups.
Hopefully they figure it out, because I need me my smartphone. So we do have one more story we want to cover before we get to the guest, and this one's pretty interesting. This one is about Backpage, and Backpage is known for their free classified ads with photos. Remember Craigslist sort of thing? They're a Dutch-owned limited liability corporation, and they're in Delaware, but its principal place of business is in Dallas. Users basically can create posts to sell items and seek roommates, participate in forums, list upcoming updates, and post job openings. But Backpage.com also has listings for adult escorts, body rubs, and other sexual services, and authorities say advertising related to those services has been extremely lucrative. Worldwide revenue from the adult ads on Backpage topped almost $3.1 million in just 1 week last year, according to the California court affidavit. Warrant used to search the company's Dallas headquarters says those ads amounted to about $50 million between January 2013 and May 2015 in California alone. Just this past week, CEO of Backpage was arrested facing charges of alleged sex trafficking. The affidavit alleges that Ferrer expanded Backpage's share of online sex marketing by creating affiliated sites with related content. Raking in millions of dollars from the trafficking and exploiting a vulnerable victim is outrageous and despicable and illegal, California Attorney General Kamala Harris said in the statement. Backpage and its executives purposely and unlawfully designed Backpage to the world's top online brothel. So he hasn't been convicted yet, but there has been some evidence mounting. And just like other services like Craigslist, they kind of try to avoid these things by removing listings. So I think this kind of opens the door. Is this just kind of leaving it open for this type of service? What do you think, Brian? Leaving this open for this type of service to just kind of move it off to the kind of like the underpinnings underneath the web that's kind of like, hidden now? Or are they going to keep posting on these kind of public websites?
It's definitely going to hit it's already on the dark web. But what we got to do is we got to make sure that things like this are not easy to get to. Joe Citizen is not going to know how to get onto the dark web. Joe Citizen, though, has the ability to do Google searching. And if something like this has it and it's easily searchable and they can find it, must be okay because it's a public website. No, this is not right at all, Joe Citizen. Sex trafficking and child prostitution has been running rampant through the world. And if you have a son or daughter, notice I said son or daughter, this world needs to be shut down in the hardest possible way with the hardest possible penalties. This guy needs to be stuck in a deep, dark hole and the key thrown away. I was involved in a project where I got to run the bolt cutters cutting chains off child slaves. And I firmly believe that if we had a firing squad, he's convicted, put him in front of the firing squad. Gee, do you think I got an opinion about this?
So this is interesting, though, because, you talk about the dark web, right, and how they're, we're pushing these types of businesses and these types of lucrative things to that type of, to the dark web. But, I think this also can change. I mean, we see it even with Reddit, and I want to throw it over to you, Curtis. I think we see it where, even though these companies are being taken down and they're being forced to remove these things, sometimes people just will go and post links to other sites. So they'll basically put up a listing and they'll just post somewhere else and people will just be redirected to somewhere else. Is this an epidemic, Curtis? Do you think that there's a way to stop this?
Is it an epidemic? Probably. While on the one hand, this has been around for a long, long time, it has certainly been made much easier for a wider number of people to become involved through the agency of a lot of these websites that we're talking about. The law enforcement people that I've talked to are a little bit of a divided mind because on the one hand, they hate the idea that you have a site like this that makes it easier for these folks to meet and engage in sex trafficking. On the other hand, having a fairly easy place for these folks to get together makes it easier for the law enforcement agencies to find them and stop them, treating it sort of as a big public honeypot, if you will. So it's a two-edged thing. Now, will it continue to bounce around? Absolutely. I think that we have seen that. We've watched it bounce from place to place to place over the last, realistically, 20 years. It will continue to bounce around. Hopefully, we can continue to drive it further away from those who don't have the technological expertise to get to it and make it a smaller pool of miscreants for law enforcement to have to keep track of. But I think that looking for any technological fix to what is basically a human behavior problem is naive. This requires a lot of different approaches to work out a final fix, not least of which is adults, whether they are actively involved on the internet or not, taking care of the kids. This is one of the basic human drives, to take care of children, and it's one of those drives that we should cherish and honor more than we do. I think that this is one where, as a parent, I also have some fairly strong feelings, and we ought to be doing everything possible to keep these folks from acting on any of the fantasies that they might harbor.
Absolutely. I definitely think we should be taking care of our children in that sense. Well, that's done it for that bite. That's done it for all the bites. But don't go anywhere, because next up we have an interview with a cybersecurity expert to talk about consumer cyber threats. But before we do that, let's go ahead and thank another sponsor for This Week in Enterprise Tech. Padre wants to tell you about it. Padre.
We'll get right back to the action, but first let's take another moment to thank a sponsor of the Twiat Riot. Now, we're all in IT, and we all know what it's like to use the wrong tool. I mean, sometimes it's just something that was around when we got into the job. Sometimes it's something that we bought that didn't quite measure up to what was being sold. Well, that's why I'm so happy to have Jira and Atlassian as a sponsor of the Twiat Riot. You see, the Jira Service Desk from Atlassian is the perfect way to modernize your IT support and make sure that you've got all the tools necessary to solve problems going into the future. Jira Service Desk is a new service management software that IT teams will love. It's built on the Jira platform. Now, Jira Service Desk delivers everything that your IT team needs out of the box at a cost-effective price. Now, the second you open up Jira, you will get the ability to give customers an easy way to ask for help. You'll help your agents be productive, being able to put out fires while helping those employees get stuff done. It also lets you stay on top of service-level agreements with dynamic queues and mobile alerts, and automate repetitive tasks so that your agents can focus on solving the important stuff rather than filing papers. Jira Service Desk is simple to set up and so affordable that you won't even need your boss's approval. We've got Jira here at Twit. It helped us with the new workflow at the new place. And I tell you, when you've got software that's easy to use, that's easy to respond to, and that helps your staff keep on top of every problem, it makes everything easier. That's really the greatest testimony I can give to Jira. So here's what we want you to do. We want you to try Jira Service Desk. For a free trial, visit Atlassian.com/twit. That's Atlassian.com/twit. The first 100 signups will receive a free t-shirt. See why over 20,000 IT teams love Jira Service Desk by trying it free today. That's Atlassian.com/twit. And we thank Jira for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech.
Thanks, Padre. Well, folks, this brings us to my favorite part of the show, where we bring in outside experts on This Week in Enterprise Tech to dump their knowledge upon the Twiat Riot. And in this episode, it's no exception. We'd like to welcome the Director of Eastern European Research and Analyst at Flashpoint, a man who's no stranger to cybersecurity, Mr. Vitali Kremez. Now, we know that Flashpoint was founded in 2010. It was described as a global leader in threat intelligence and research company that focuses on the deep and dark web to produce insights for the business in the business risk intelligence. They just recently raised $10 million in Series B funding. Vitali, tell us a little bit about Flashpoint and what is your work at Flashpoint?
Hello, team. Thank you so much in the first place for having us here, and it's a pleasure to be part of the live show. So at Flashpoint, what we do, we specialize in a deep and dark web. We focus on cyber criminals first. So we try to learn as much as we can about them. So we try to get access to the most password protected, vetted, deep and dark web forums and communities, collect intelligence from them, learn how criminals can abuse and compromise our financial systems, each one of us. Once we learn that, we also have subject matter expertise in the areas of different languages. We have more than 10 different linguists who speak from Arabic to Russian. So once we get past those virtual bouncers, get accepted to the most vetted communities, as Curt has previously pointed out, what we care with deep and dark web is becoming a big concern for us, because deep and dark web, that's where the most interesting communications we've seen happening. That's where we learned about new tactics and procedures, how criminals can exploit new vulnerabilities in financial systems, how they can steal data. So we get this intelligence and we alert our clients and our industry community about the threats to them. So essentially with the ultimate goal of actually empowering our community and empowering our people to protect themselves against those threats in a battle with cyber criminals. What we also say here at Flashpoint is to know more about cyber criminals, to beat them. We have to, at some point, to think like them, to learn as much as we can about them, because they do operate in deep and dark web forms, which are password protected or require specific software to access them. So what we do, we provide this data collected and provide it to our clients in an environment that allows them to perform their own research if they need to. And that's we identify priority intelligence requirements and we collect intelligence based on that. And essentially is the ultimate goal is to enable our industry community to know how can criminals exploit systems and how can we protect our industry and world itself from those cyber criminals. So essentially, that's what we focus on at Flashpoint.
Fantastic. So what kind of things do you work on? And what do you focus on at Flashpoint?
So at Flashpoint, I specialize in mainly the collections from a deep and dark web, the most vetted, password-protected forums. So one of my focus is Eastern European cybercrime and how those criminals can exploit vulnerabilities in the U.S. or any infrastructure that impacts our industry. So we get access to those forums, and once we're part of those communities, we can collect intelligence using both passive and active intelligence. So once we can engage with an actor in one-on-one chat, we can learn more about their techniques and their exploitation methods. So essentially is we collect this intelligence and we provide to our clients, and we can let them know how and why criminals target them. And just getting to the mindset of criminals helps us and enables to provide us better protections for our industry. So
Sure.
My focus is mainly to develop that intelligence.
Got it. So this is an interesting segue because let's segue into we have an interesting topic we want to talk about, both card skimming and EMV skimming. People have seen a false sense of security in the past with both ATMs and POS systems, including even gas pumps, using their payment cards. And so some of the audience members they haven't heard is there's a well-known hack called card skimming, where a customer's card information is captured from a magnetic strip using a skimming device at the ATM or POS device, and sometimes even a mini video device over top, a video recording device, can capture their PINs as well. Hackers can produce counterfeit cards and fraudulent card withdrawals, and in this case, customers don't know any different. They just look like normal transactions, and they still retain their card for more use. So to combat this, they came up with to combat skimming. They came up with the idea of EMV, which was developed and actually named after the Europay, MasterCard, and Visa groups. But EMV is commonly known as chip and PIN. And it basically encrypts people's personal data. So Vitali, now that the audience members, they don't really know about EMV and how it's combating card skimmers, can you explain to the audience maybe what EMV is supposed to do and why it's more secure than these magnetic strips?
Sure thing. Yeah, thank you so much for this question. I think the most important thing, like just a brief explanation what EMV is and why it's important to all of us. Essentially, in the US, with the rollout of all previously magnetic stripe credit card data to EMV standard, we have an extra added layer of security to our cards. In this case, in our credit cards, when you look at that, you'll see a chip. This chip contains a data, which can be either static dynamic data or dynamically allocated data. That's another layered protection for us. So in case when cyber criminals steal, for instance, card present data, like let's say point of sale terminals from swiped transactions, so they would not be able to sell it or monetize it because they need PIN information. PIN chip information, which is encoded in this EMV chip. So why is it important to us? Because the US recently decided to actually roll out all the cards to new EMV standard. And as the cyber criminals had difficulties to exploit this new added layer of security to credit cards, we know they've been exploiting magnetic stripes for years since Russian underground was born from Carter Planet days. With this new EMV technology, it's still kind of a cat and mouse games where criminals always find ways to exploit them. That's one of the ways we identified new techniques and how we can exploit EMVs. And I'll be happy to answer that in a follow-up question.
Sure. So yeah, I think we saw back in 2011. There's several black hat presentations where it was around another technique, which is this in fact skimming technique, even with EMV. Can you maybe go in a little bit further of how they're actually doing that?
Sure. Essentially, is the EMV skimming attack. What is it? What do we mean about skimming attack? In this case, we mean an attack that allows the interception of EMV encoded data to the point of sale terminal. In this case, the skimming attack allows us to either physical device interception from the point when you swipe or use your PIN, chip of your card, and to the point of sale terminal. The criminals are able to intercept that. And the way they intercept that, it's essentially, they target this data that's encoded in chip. And the data that's encoded in chip by financial institutions can be either statically encoded or dynamically. For instance, in Latin America or Eastern Europe, they still use static beans that can be stolen by criminals, intercepted by EMV skimmers, and encoded back to the cards and used for subsequent shopping. So criminals can sell it in the credit card shops. And they can use this data to either purchase high-value merchandise at shops like Barney's or Goldman or Saks Fifth Avenue. Or they can also use this data to resell it to other lower-tier criminals who can encode this data and shop it. The problem with the EMV skimming was the static beans, the static data that's encoded in that. Recently, the banks in developed countries, like in US and many others, they moved away from static and they use dynamically allocated chip data inside of this chip artifact, if you will. So that's a problem of cyber criminals. But even that's a problem, as a problem for cyber criminals, the under kind of developing countries and where the financial institutions are not too robust with patching or issuing new chips that are not based in a static encoding, those are vulnerable to exploitations by cyber criminals across the world. And that's we've been tracking and identifying in Flashpoint those criminals and reporting on that.
So yeah, I think a year later after this whole skimming technique came in for EMV, we were seeing some additional attacks around specifically built EMV cards and the use of malware on the scanners. Are you familiar with this attack, Vitali? Have you been able to see this attack and how it's being exploited?
Based on our coverage of the deep and dark web, what we know is one of the, I guess, probably the most impactful EMV type of malware attack where basically required some physical interaction with the device. Those attacks were not done remotely per se, as far as we know. Most of the time, they were involved direct access to the point of sale terminal where criminals could install a specific malware that could be powered from internally from the device itself, and then we're using specific cards or using specific chips to retrieve the data subsequently. So this was a kind of a malware artifact attacks. What we know that the Russian, Eastern European cybercriminals have been testing those techniques back in Russia for years, and they've been, like staging those attacks and congregating in forums and discussing that. So those are very common ways like how malware can still interact EMV data. Previously, with Target and Home Depot breaches, when it stole billions of cards and the financial institutions suffered millions of losses and suits that emerged, the criminals were not stealing the EMV data. What they were stealing magnetic stripe data, which is way less secure. So with this EMV chip data, the malware is not necessarily able to capture that. The memory scraping malware is not able to. So that's a problem for cybercriminals. And that's also where the EMV scheming attacks becoming more prevalent, because the criminals constantly, it's a cat and mouse games. As the financial institutions develop new layers of security, criminals always find ways to exploit that. We've seen that, and we have years of experience to prove that. And so with this EMV chip, this was interesting to us, scheming attack, because that's attack on a new technology that can be used to, compromise, and you cause mass losses of financial institutions, or even, disrupt the economy of developing countries, like with the ATM heist attacks.
Right. So it's interesting because even this year, I think at Black Hat there was another exploit kind of around. It was similar to the malware exploit where they used both passive and active man-in-the-middle attacks to replace key libraries files on the pin pad devices. Have you heard of this particular exploit and how it kind of related to the old malware attacks?
No, I haven't heard this exploit, used or weaponized on any deep and dark web forums. What we also know, like those exploits are very, very not too often exploited by cyber criminals. And the reason why, they usually go after the lowest hanging fruit possible. So the complex malware attacks on EMV devices can be proved to be cumbersome, or can require a sophisticated operation, or not too easy to, to orchestrate or to drain those, like point of sale devices or ATMs. What we know with this specific attack that they can allow even unsophisticated criminals to orchestrate heists, those are becoming the most interesting. So I think those attack was not specifically referenced based on our coverage of deep and dark web, but we're aware of those and we track any chatter related to that.
Fantastic. Well, when we return, we have some more about EMV vulnerabilities and how the industry can combat against them. But first, we have another amazing supporter of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and Padre wants to tell you about it. Padre?
Thanks again, guys. We'll come right back. But first, let's go ahead and thank another sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now, let me ask you a question. Are you looking for the perfect hire? Well, of course you are. Everybody is, because it's the people you bring into your company who are going to determine the success or failure of your projects. They bring in the skill, they bring in the vision, they bring in the imagination that you need to be successful. So why is it that you're letting your hiring go to chance? Don't do that. Use the perfect way to cast your net and bring in the people you need to succeed with ZipRecruiter. Now, posting jobs in one place isn't enough to find those quality candidates. That's the fundamental truth that ZipRecruiter recognizes. With ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to more than 100 job boards, including social media networks like Facebook and Twitter, all with a single click. You just post once, and then you can watch your candidates roll into ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use interface. They offer an optimized page that looks great on any screen, and they have a unique mobile apply process for more visitors and more applicants, allowing the people who have the skills that you need to apply on any device that they might be using. ZipRecruiter helps you find candidates in any city, any industry nationwide, and this all means no more juggling of emails or calls to your office. You can add multiple users to your account. You can quickly screen candidates with real-world questions using free-form, multiple-choice, or yes-no formats. This lets you view candidates' responses in conjunction with their beautifully formatted resumes, rate them, and hire the right person fast. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by over 1 million businesses. More than 125 million candidate applications have been delivered. Yours could be next. Right now, you can post on ZipRecruiter for free by going to ZipRecruiter.com/twit. That's ZipRecruiter.com/twit. And we thank ZipRecruiter for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now back to the show.
Thanks, Padre. So this type of hacking, this type of deep level hacking that they're doing on devices, especially with an EMV standpoint, is pretty sophisticated. They're getting down to the hardware layer and they're attacking the systems at that layer. Can companies, and Vitali, this is a question for you. Can companies actually combat this by making sure that their devices have point-to-point encryption enabled, and also asking the hardware manufacturers to, like you were saying, force updates more often down to these devices?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So this attack, it's also, yes, we basically what we do at Flashpoint, we kind of help and inform affected parties of those type of either vulnerabilities or exploitation. So for instance, with the EMV attack, how they can protect themselves, I guess definitely maintaining. So what's interesting, like just to take a few steps back, how does this attack been orchestrated? So they have physical access to point of sale devices, cyber criminals, and they install a different device on those point of sale terminals or ATMs. What's interesting about that is companies should definitely monitor, or shops or any other malls, they should monitor their point of sale terminals. Do not leave them unsupervised, or check them if they look suspicious. See if there are any dangling wires connected to that. See if it's they definitely should supervise and check if they are there's some overlayer or some other physical structure attached to that would be an indication of a suspicion, and require the company maybe to inspect them and see if those are actually operate normally, or this is something added by a cyber criminal. So in this type of attack, what we know is we need to be vigilant. Not only companies need to be vigilant, but like all of us, consumers too. When we shop at grocery stores, before we use our EMV cards, chip cards, we should look into those devices. We'd see if they are shaky, if they look suspicious, if they're located in areas that there is no surveillance cameras, if there is a potential for cyber criminals to exploit them. I would go to a different grocery store just to make sure to be safe. And that's something you can do on the personal level, and something that the company should proactively make sure from their perspective too, if there is any different device connected to that. And definitely that would require possible audit of the terminals to see if they're functioning well. And I think periodic audits of software, as well as doing the payment card industry standard data security compliance, PCI DSS, would allow us to better protect ourselves against this threat. So I think those are kind of my ideas.
Got it. Yeah, and I want to bring my co-hosts in because I want to get their thoughts on this as well. Brian, what are your thoughts on this? What is the best way to combat this type of sophisticated hacking from an EMV perspective?
I was more than a little disappointed when the United States went to basically chip and sign instead of chip and pin. Chip and pin, even though it's not perfect, I like the idea of something you have and something that you know. I'd really like to see this more and more, especially, say, for instance, credit cards have what's called a floor limit. It's a limit for each type of store, where a transaction below this floor limit does not require a signature. And it's a convenience that the United States consumers have really demanded. What I would like to see is, once we get over the floor limit, require something we know, be it biometrics, be it at least a PIN, something. We need something in there to try and make this better. And, I'm actually quite fond of Apple Pay. I don't like NFC cards because those can be skimmed from a distance, with a high gain antenna and an RF reader. But if I'm only turning the NFC on for a short amount of time, for a short distance, when I'm buying a soda pop, or if I'm buying breakfast at McDonald's or something like that, I think that's good, especially since those are seem to be transaction-based rather than just device-based. So I would say it'd be great if someday our companies could actually get their act together and say, hey, I'd love to see them get a single transaction code so that my credit card number is never exposed in the wild. That's what I think we really need to have. And so, we had a picture of the Google, someone using an Apple Watch to do a payment. I think that's the future, and I think because it's software and we're used to having those pushed out as updates, I'm hoping we're going to see much more secure payment systems in the future.
Right. Yeah, I think, it was interesting because, liabilities kind of shifted back in, I think, 2015, back on October 1st. Companies were supposed to be held or could be held, quote unquote, for certain types of fraudulent transactions if they didn't have EMV readers. And you talked about, the fact that some of them are just going to chip and sign. So, I want to throw this over to Curtis. How are we seeing this affect the enterprise industry? Are we seeing an urgency enough coming from companies and banks? Are they making the switch fast enough? Are they being held to this high standard if there's fraudulent charges?
Are they making the change fast enough? I think the answer is no, because the real deadline was a year ago for companies, retailers to make the change. And if you go out and buy stuff, that we're still in the process of making the change. I agree with Brian. I wish we had gone ahead and gone to the European model of chip and pin rather than chip and sign. A number of reasons, ranging from greater security to simple consistency, where you could take your credit card when you do travel abroad and use the same system abroad that you use here. When you look at the governing agreements for the different cards, there is a chain of liability that moves from the merchant at the point of scanning all the way through to the credit card association and the issuing bank for payment. And you can trace that chain of liability. I got deeply into that a long time ago when I was doing some testing for credit card clearinghouses. But the thing is, the liability tends to sit at the card clearinghouse. So not with the bank, but with Visa itself, the association, or with MasterCard in a card present transaction. What they've done is say that in a card present transaction, if they haven't implemented the chip and signature, the EMV, then they have gone to placing the liability onto the vendor at the point of transaction. And what a lot of these companies have done is something that we've talked about in other contexts around security. They've decided that the cost of dealing with the fraud that is going to come from not implementing EMV at this point is less than the cost of implementing EMV. So until those cost lines cross, we're going to see companies dragging their feet. We're going to see more people subject to credit card fraud and to identity theft. And, it's a financial conversation in the back halls at these big vendors. How much does it cost to put in new POS terminals versus how much does it cost to pay out on fraud? And for a lot of companies, the fraud payouts are just the cheaper way of doing business.
There's an interesting discussion actually brewing in the chat. I think Dallas brought it up. They said, why not use fingerprints? And I think the other people like Reaver B. Mike said, fingerprints aren't unique. So I want to throw it over to Curt. To Brian, actually. Are biometrics more secure here? Should companies be moving to that?
Well, the reality is fingerprints, if you're using a cheap reader, so like the ones that you drag your finger across on a PC or something like that, or even the one that the iPhone and iPads are using, those are not really reading the fingerprint, but the electrical pattern, the capacitance pattern of your finger. The unfortunate fact of life is the inexpensive readers, the ones that you're going to see on mass-produced devices, are not that hard to fake. There's been couple of Instructables and different types of websites where it was just way too easy. And we've even seen the new MacGyver do it. It's not quite that easy, but it's pretty close. The expensive biometrics actually track blood flow and things like that. The other option is, of course, iris scanners. But I actually was working on designing a system for international funds transfer. And so my knee-jerk reaction was, iris scanners are pretty darn good. But the amount of pushback I got from the bank personnel was staggering. Nobody wanted to stick their eye on it. And it says, I don't want no laser in my eye. And the reality is, yeah, that's pretty good. If someone's had a bender the night before and they're all bloodshot, it might not read. So that's not perfect either. I'm actually very fond of something you have and something that you know. Putting, the Google authentication system or anything like that where your phone generates a 6-digit number every 60 seconds is pretty darn good. But I really don't have anything that's absolutely spectacular. Those phone authentication systems require connectivity, and what happens if you're in the basement of a building? So I think I'm going to actually throw this to Vitali and say, if you were going to design a monetary exchange system from scratch, and this is, any reasonable technology, even if it doesn't exist yet, but say, okay, maybe in the near future, what would you do to build one? Something that's a lot less hackable and is still not horribly intrusive. What do you think?
Oh, thank you, Brian, so much. Yeah, sure. I think it's a very interesting question you just posed. We look at those type of problems at Flashpoint from very criminal perspective, cyber criminal exploitation perspective. So definitely as part of I'm honestly very inspired of the blockchain. We've seen some banks also talking about creating peer-to-peer type of structure that would allow us to use some, Bitcoin-like, payment authentication authorization. So that's something I'm really fascinated as a kind of template for my future perfect monetary systems. But it's also definitely I would add features to, let's say if it's an EMV card, I would add additional layer of security. Brian, you actually pointed out very perfectly that something that would be added value to that. So criminals, we know that with the EMV actually roll out in the U.S., we've seen way less communications and way less attacks on the point-of-sale terminals using malware, specifically malware that scrapes memory of those devices that was used in Home Depot and Target. So criminals didn't see how they can easily monetize it. So in this attack, as it's EMV becoming a new norm across our kind of cyber landscape and also the financial industry, we will also, honestly, we'll design a system that takes all the lessons that we've learned from those attacks. We know that adding an extra layer of security for criminals is going to be a huge problem. But we know that's going to definitely stop a few criminals. We'll take them some time to actually reinvent themselves, find a different algorithm to break it. For instance, currently, what the current actually exploitation level of the U.S. EMV systems, it involves it's a very interesting kind of algorithmic attack. So knowing that U.S., for instance, use dynamically allocated chip circuit data. So essentially what they send to the processor, they send a chip data that's dynamically allocated every single time, pretty much similar to what Google authenticated as. So those attacks would involve, knowing the algorithm of the financial institutions. Definitely criminals are capable of doing that and breaking this algorithm. We've seen relevant chatter that speaks to that. But yeah, so that's again another point of consideration when we build this system. And also just to highlight what Curtis said, security should be part of that system. We know, for instance, SWIFT system was so compromised and exploited by cyber criminals recently. Criminals were stealing almost $1 billion worth of dollars attributed to SWIFT-specific attacks. The payment system is going to be vulnerable. We know that. But taking into account those different layers, added layers of security, something that you know, something that you have, and something that can be generated and approved by a third party, can help us mitigate the exposure as to this type of fraud or those type of attacks. The attacks are not going to stop. It's still going to be a cat and mouse game between cyber criminals and institutors of anti-fraud measures. So just to kind of I guess highlight the system that would enable us to build security from scratch, leverage impossible blockchain authentication and robustness of that systems, where you can do transactions quickly and also peerlessly, decentralized, and add in different layers of security might help us actually to protect against mass exploitations, as we've seen with SWIFT attacks and point of sale breaches. So
fantastic.
I think that's what I think.
Yeah, fantastic ideas. Unfortunately, we've actually run out of time. And folks, you've done it again. You've used up another hour of listening to the best dang enterprise show on the planet, according to 9 out of 10 chips and pins. Vitali Kremez, Director of Eastern Europe Research and Analyst at Flashpoint, thank you so much for being on This Week in Enterprise Tech. This was a great episode. Can you tell the folks at home where they can find you and your work and a little bit more about Flashpoint? Sure thing. It's been a pleasure to be a part of it. So our website is located at flashpoint-intel.com. You can reach out to us via contact field. And definitely, if you have any issues or if you are interested in what we do and how we do, definitely feel free to reach out to us via our website. We'll be happy to walk you through our products and what we do and how we do at Flashpoint. And we'll definitely provide you with subject matter expertise regarding deep and dark web and how we can protect and on the individual level as well as on the company level. And we'll be happy to work with you. So our ultimate goal is obviously to make the world a safer place, and that's Flashpoint. We're very committed to that. And we'll be happy to assist with anything. That's Vitali Kremez from Flashpoint. Thank you for being part of the Twiat Riot. Gentlemen, also want to thank you. Thank you for being here. It wouldn't be Twiat without you. My colleagues and the reason for this pretty great show. Starting with you, Mr. Curtis Franklin. Always amazing working with you. Can you tell the folks at home where they can find your work and a little bit about Information Radio?
Well, they can find me at informationweek.com. I'm going to have a couple of new podcasts up next week. One pretty interesting because those golden delicious fries at McDonald's, they don't just fry themselves. And there's going to be a piece on how they train more than 700,000 new employees a year to make those delicious French fries around the world. So look for that at Information Week. In addition, next week, I'm going to be at the Gartner Symposium, finding lots of interesting people to talk to, bringing those stories to you at Information Week and Information Week Radio. I will not be here on next week's Twiat Riot because I'm helping my dear wife do move in at the Orlando Maker Faire where she's exhibiting. So next time I'm here, I'll have news from Gartner, from Maker Faire, and who knows where else. French fries definitely don't fry themselves. That's Mr. Curtis Franklin from Information Week Radio. And, of course, Mr. Brian Chee. Brian, where can they find you and what you're up to? I'm going to be hiding in power vaults for the next couple of weeks as we deploy more and more power quality meters and smart meters around the University of Hawaii campus and the Pearl Harbor Naval Base. Ought to be interesting, and we're going to have a lot of fun building ginormous power models. Fantastic. Mr. Brian Chee, Director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu. Always amazing to have you. Well, and of course, thank you to you, our loyal listeners and viewers. We love doing this show, and we couldn't do this Enterprise Tech, This Week in Enterprise Tech, without you. You come back week after week, and it's really nice to have you here. And in order for us to keep doing the show, we want you to view all of our shows. So head over right now to twit.tv/Twiat. Once you're there, you can see all of our archives of the Twiat episodes and show notes, especially this episode. Episodes are in high-def video, audio. You can get on your mobile phone, your tablet, every which way in the show. Tons of formats to feed, and you can subscribe and view and listen each week. Also, remember to do this. We do this show live every Friday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. You can come and see the show recorded live at live.twit.tv. And as long as you're watching live, why not jump into the chat room?
and IRC at twit.tv and ask live questions to our guests and co-hosts. We love having them there, and sometimes they inspire us to move the show in a different direction. And finally, I want to thank everyone at Twit who makes this show possible. Thanks to Leo and Lisa for allowing us to continue to do This Week in Enterprise Tech week after week. Mr. Brian Chee, our super producer, and of course, Father Robert Balliser for including us in his adventures in Enterprise. You can always follow me at twitter.com/LouMM, a great place to see all that I do outside of the studio, and a great place to actually suggest topics and even guests for our future episodes. Until next time, I'm Louis Maresca, and just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep quiet.